Hello and welcome to another Slow Chat. I'm Topher Field and today I'll be chatting with Steve Baxter. Now you may know him from the Shark Tank TV show, but tonight we'll only talk very briefly about Shark Tank. We're going to go through a whole bunch of other topics. It was a great chat. I had to pre-record it just due to scheduling issues. We covered things like aviation, a huge passion of Steve's and something that I enjoy looking at. I don't have the money that Steve has to actually do anything, but I enjoy looking at it. We talked geopolitics, military procurement. That was an interesting one. Business, Dick Smith. We have some shared experiences there and a whole lot more. So it's a great fun chat. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment. If you're watching on YouTube, ring the bell so that you get notified when I upload videos. And if you're enjoying what I'm doing here, then please go to topherfield.net and join my email list. It's the only guaranteed way that I can stay in touch with you in the event that I do get deplatformed from YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and everywhere else. And of course, you can follow me on all of those platforms at Topherfield. Also, please consider supporting me via my Subscribestar. This isn't something that I promote very often, but I'm going to start talking about it a little bit more because, well, I'm spending more time than ever before doing things like this video. It's subscribestar.com/Topherfield, and you can become one of the small but special group of people that make it financially possible for me to spend time doing things like the Slow Chat that you're going to see tonight. Unfortunately, we did have some technical issues at Steve's end, and at times his audio is pretty difficult to hear. I had to make a judgment call, and I made the decision that I wanted to proceed with the interview anyway because, well, Steve had been generous enough to actually schedule more than an hour of his time. He's a busy man. There's a lot of people that want to talk to him, and there was no guarantee how long it would be before we could reschedule. So I made the decision to proceed regardless of the technical difficulties that we were having. So if Steve is hard to hear at times, I do apologize. I did make that judgment call, and I do think it was the right thing to do, but it's unfortunate that at times you are going to miss a couple of words here and there, but I still think it's well worth listening, and Steve has a lot of good stuff to say. So with that disclaimer out of the way and my apologies for any audio issues that may bother you along the way, without any further ado, please enjoy my Slow Chat with Steve Baxter. Steve, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. You're a busy man. You're a man in demand. There's many things you could be doing, and you've chosen to be here with me, and I do appreciate it very much. Welcome.
No worries, Topher. You're very persistent, so it's all good.
Well, look, we bumped into each other at CPAC. I think that was the first time we'd ever actually crossed paths. I don't think we'd crossed paths before then.
Years back? I can't remember.
Maybe at a libertarian conference or something like that. Maybe it happened at some point. But it was great to see you. We chatted briefly there, and here we are now. I've discovered I've done a little bit of research, as obviously I do. That's my job. And I discovered you were born in Cloncurry, and which of course is just outside of Mount Isa. Mount Isa is where my older brother met his now wife, where she was living at the time, and we spent a bit of time up there visiting the old open cut uranium mine and having a look at some of that deep country Queensland living. My first question for you is that where your love of aeroplanes came from? Were you kind of exposed to getting around by aeroplane way out in outback Queensland?
No, well, look, I left Cloncurry. Look, Cloncurry had a massive impact on me. I left there when I was 10 months old. So,
no, I can see that it really shaped you and turned you into who you are today. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, in general, in the outback, in regional Queensland. So, I'm only one of 37 or 8 cousins, aunties and uncles combined who wasn't born in Rockhampton, which is, somewhat interesting. I was born in Cloncurry. So my dad was a clerk in Queensland Rail. And moved around. So for most of it, Rockhampton clan. But I spent most of my time as a kid in Emerald in central Queensland, home of in the Bowen Basin, home of the world's best thermal coal. Where there's about 600 years of world thermal coal supply in that Bowen Basin. It's an amazing place. But loved it. It was a different time, great neighbourhood. We could ride around town. Town was 3,000 people. Town was nothing. It was almost in mining. There was no fly in, fly out. Literally, they bought miners' houses, the best houses in town. And so we used to, ride around and be told to come back when the street lights came on, and we used to chase around behind the mosquito fogging trailer and breathe in DDT or something. I don't know whatever it was, but you just run around like absolute little grubs, and I'll run around on our bikes. I remember because it was hot as hell. Most of Queensland's hot as hell, even back then, not just now with climate change. Actually, But we were paid $5 to swim a length of the pool, 50 metres of the pool. $5, it's huge, $50 an hour, right? And the reason was as soon as that could happen, mum and dad could send us to the pool, but they just the oldest teenager in the street would take 20 kids in tow behind them, and their parents say, "Okay, go to the pool," and you know that your mum and dad, you weren't going to drown, basically. So you went to the pool because the only way to keep warm, keep cool.
Keep cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. It's a very different part of the world, and I'm an urban boy. I was born in Corowa on the Murray River, but then when I was 2.5, moved to Melbourne. I've been in Melbourne basically ever since, and that's about to change now with all of the various events happening down here in Victoria. That's about to change, and I'm about to start exploring more of this big, beautiful land. You then, from Emerald, obviously, you spent some time in the army.
3 years in Wodonga. Talk about Corowa. 3 years in Wodonga, so not very far from Corowa.
Yep. Okay. And had that been an ambition of yours for a long time? Was that a diversion? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, look, it was an ambition, I suppose. It was, so I joined when I was 15 years old, Topher. So as much as a 15-year-old have an ambition, back then the army could recruit 15-year-olds, and thank God that's now illegal. To be honest, so signed a 9-year contract when I was 15 years old. Did an apprenticeship, so I did an electronics apprenticeship at the school in Wodonga. But the sad thing there is, I think that the army no longer does that, and society no longer actually, creates these amazing tradespeople from reasonably young people. Whether you should do it at 15 years, in a military sense, at 15 years old, no, that's ridiculous. But in a civilian sense, I think there's a lot to it. So I want to join. I think that like a lot of people, that you want to join the army right up to the point where you first go off the bus and they start shouting at you. Then shit gets real. Look, army apprentices scheme. It's in a bit of a shame that society no longer does things similar to that, at least in the civilian sense. And from there, I did 3 years in Wodonga, Wodonga. Got posted to Brisbane, a lovely place called Bulimba on the Brisbane River, which has been sold to property developers, as it should be. It's a lovely spot, but it's expensive real estate for a military base. And from there, I went to Nogra, so 3 years in Brisbane as well, and then I finished off in Adelaide at an air defence ship, basically repairing air defence. Systems. Yeah.
It's interesting. I spent 2.5 years in the reserves as an infantryman. Never deployed. I'm not claiming any status out of that, but it was a really interesting couple of years. For me, it actually begun my journey away from being a conservative and towards being a libertarian. It was really that's a whole other story. But I found it was very, very good for me in a lot of different ways. And I do find myself conflicted. I'm opposed to the idea of conscription, mandatory service, any of that sort of stuff on principle. But I recognize that time for me was actually very beneficial, and that there's an awful lot of young men, especially, who would really benefit from a couple of years being yelled at and with that discipline being imposed. But it conflicts with my values. I don't know what to think about that.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? I don't disagree with you. To be honest, I'm a lot big into the whole conservative v libertarian thing at that point as well. But so when I joined, so I was the 42nd class. I've ever seen like little badges I wear until there's a little 42 on there, and it crabs the icon or the logo symbol of our unit, I suppose. And so I think they had pretty sure they had a 50th. They canned the service. We signed the UN Convention against the Child Soldier, and apparently we couldn't tell shitty tin pot African countries they couldn't recruit 15-year-olds, and we still were. So we had to stop doing that, basically, which I think that's a good thing. Don't get me wrong, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But as a dad of kids now, like, Jesus Christ, imagine sending 15-year-olds to that. So there is something missing there. I don't think any soldier wants the conscripts standing beside them. I don't think that's honestly, if the country needed that, it'd be pretty bloody dire. Then I don't think I'd object to it. But I mean, we're not talking like a vague situation there. We're talking like a pretty stark binary existential situation. That sort of digs in as well. I mean, we'll probably might get there. I've just started an entire defence-relating part of my investing business now, which is called Beaten Zone Ventures, which if you're an infantryman, you probably know what that means. Where we invest in sovereign lethal capability. So I'm not sugarcoating anything. You don't stop bad people with harsh language alone. You need weapons. And we need more of them here.
Yeah, it's been one of these really interesting times that I reflect on quite a lot, because obviously you sign up to the military, particularly if you're signing up to be an infantryman, you have to start thinking about things in a much more concrete way when it comes to the use of lethal force, what's right and what's wrong. And that's really where I began to find myself shifting away from being a conservative and towards a libertarian. Was, as a conservative, I was raised as a staunch conservative. And there was the Trinity was God the Father, God the Son, and God the Johnny Howard. That was the version of politics that I was raised with. And the military, of course, is held in extremely high regard. And I would still say there are a number of exceptional individuals within the military. I certainly would still hold to that. But the military as an organization, once you experience it from the inside, you very quickly discover that it is every bit as dysfunctional, has all of the same issues that any large organization does. They're losing paperwork. You've got individuals who are in it for the wrong reasons and have managed to get themselves into the wrong places. You've got all of the dysfunction that exists in any organization. The difference is these people are making life and death decisions. And for me, that was a real kind of seeing behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz kind of moment, where I just went, this organization that I've idolized all my life and thought, yes, this organization can make those decisions better than what I could, better than what, the local fish and chip shop could. And then you watch how they operate and you start to really question everything you believed.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree. I think it's exceptionally dysfunctional in many areas. And part of the reason, back what I'm doing now with the beaten zone, with the early stage funding of these types of things, is because we're really bad at procurement. We are terrible at procurement. I mean, we're at the point where we'll have a national crisis because we can't get enough gear to the right people. But any large bureaucracy is pretty bad. I went back in 2008, 2009. I worked with Google in California for a year. Oh my God, that place was internally dysfunctional. Like we would not, and they're almost proud of it though. They still thought they were a startup with like 60,000 staff. So it's probably different. But I think large organisations in general are actually hard. They're a machine, and if you're not exactly a machine cog in that, or part in that machine, then you're going to find it tough. The army, look, you have a lot of misalignment of things that they need stable manpower. So therefore, they had 50 for 3, 6, and 9 years, whatever it might be. Now it's 4 plus a 6 months sort of. You get 6 months notice, I want to say, to retire or resign. That'll disappear as soon as there's a conflict. I don't disagree, but I mean, I think I often think I've been asked to go and talk to sort of various elements of the military, all the leaders and stuff. I mean, I was a corporal. You can't say this nowadays, but I will. You might bleep this out, but when I left, I had the same rank as Adolf Hitler. We were both corporals, right? That's what he was in the German army. So I didn't exactly make it. He was a lance corporal, so technically I ranked him. I was a full corporal, but I didn't go very high, if you know what I mean. I partway into my service, I found a business that I wanted to do, which is in the IT, computing, telecom space, and sort of pursued that. But so I thought I was going with this point now. If I do that, I'm red herring myself and forget where I'm going.
No, that's right. Your audio is cutting in and out a little bit, but I caught most of that.
Closer, is that better? A bit closer.
Yeah, look a little bit closer is going to help for sure. So we were just talking about sort of the dysfunctionality of any large organisation, and you're quite right. You mentioned procurement, and obviously I don't want to lead you into areas where you have to talk carefully. I don't want you to upset your own clients here. But I've had a little bit to do over the years. A friend of mine, Paul Monk, Dr. Paul Monk. I don't know whether you would have come across him. He's been commissioned. Yeah, he's been commissioned by the army or by the military a few times to do reviews after the fact of their procurement processes and to make recommendations using a method of argument mapping that he's developed. I did a slow chat with him actually last year, and we talked a lot about China and Chinese intelligence, etc. And he really opened my eyes to one, just how disastrous some of the Australian procurement decisions have been. Comment on that or don't, as you see fit. But also, what
we do is we take a perfectly useful piece of equipment from somewhere else and we Frankenstein the shit out of it until it's too expensive, too late, and it actually really doesn't work that well. So, no, I actually think we seem to be proudly, woefully, and I won't answer anyone there. There's very few people in defence aren't aware of my opinions on this. I doubt they actually rate them, and maybe they shouldn't. That's fine. Part of what I'm doing is that prove a different way that you can get to a better outcome.
So the submarines, of course, are the most recent high-profile example of this, where we signed up with the French, and then we pissed off the French, and then we went with the nuclear option, having ruled out a nuclear option. And how do we tie ourselves in knots like that? And what's that doing to our actual capability?
Look, it was a stressful episode. I do recall the day I woke up and I read that headline about AUKUS and the submarines. I swear, my shoulders lifted up. I thought, my God, my kids won't speak Chinese. It was, and then a week later, bloody Morrison goes and pitches, goes and said he signed up to net zero.
Yeah.
So he pissed me off. But I thought, well, okay, so if the net zero is the price of getting their submarines, I'm happy to pay that, provided we get them next week.
Yeah.
So look, it doesn't help at all. I mean, we've just got to. It's weird. When I was I'm not too sure when you were in the military, but I was in the military. I carried an SLR.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, well, I carried an SLR, if you know what I mean, which is the same one that the guys carried, and we didn't. So we took was basically an English weapon that the English got from the Belgians, and no one did anything to it, and it worked bloody perfectly, if you know what I mean. The thing now that say the submarines is one thing, and there's no way we're going to Frankenstein a nuclear submarine. Right, we're just going to get it, and we're going to put our guys in it, guys and girls in it, and we're just going to go do our thing. Now we've gone back to the helicopters have been the worst debacle. So what's called the Taipan now, or the MRH-90 multi-role helicopter, another bloody bastardized European thing, excuse me, which has been that dysfunctional. We know that, and the armed reconnaissance helicopter. We had to call it armed reconnaissance. We couldn't call it attack because we might upset the divisions, for Christ's sake. But literally, we had all those guys in Afghanistan. We never said that they were never airworthy enough to go over there enough to support them. So all these amazing people we've got actually operating these machines, and they were invested in combat. A lot actually did exchanges and swaps with Yanks and Canadians. So we've just got to stop it. And now we're buying Apaches off the shelf. Thank you very much. Take 24 of those. And now we're going back to Black Hawks. We got rid of Black Hawks. Got these shitty MRH-90s, and now we're going back to Black Hawks. Same with the Chinooks as well. So we've just got to stop. I mean, we've just got to stop it. I think you need to fire. You actually need to fire the heads of the procurement heads in there. They honestly think they're doing the right thing and a good thing, and it's just like no.
We're a far-flung country with 25 million people. We're not exactly in a position where we have the economic wherewithal to be developing our own weapons. This is what astonishes me. I think Australians, we have this delusion of always punching above our weight in every area. And if you look at sports and a couple of other areas, we do punch above our weight on the global stage. Doesn't mean we can just walk in and go, no, you know what, we want our own bespoke submarine because we're buying 6 of them. Like 6, seriously, come on. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know how intimately involved you've been or aware you are of what's happened with the multi-role fighters and the efforts to replace all aircraft with one aircraft, but actually it's 3 different aircraft because we've got different lengths of airframe and different all sorts of stuff going on. What's wrong with the F-15? One of the most successful on a kill-to-death ratio, one of the most successful air superiority weapons in history.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So it's a very capable machine. The Raptor. Sorry, Raptor. Excuse me, the Lightning. The F-35 Lightning.
The F-35 is very
F-22 is a bit great if we got those, but that's another story. So very capable aircraft. Its weaknesses keep being talked about. But, it was built to do some things and not other things. It wasn't built to dogfight. It was built to do a whole bunch of things. You know what I mean? It was really built to be like a long-range, stealthy murderer of other aircraft. So, so where I'm going here, I think, and a lot of thinking of this, basically a lot of personal capital into defence investing. So you tend to do a bit of thinking when that happens. And when you look at the way you look at the cornucopia of shit we've actually sent Ukraine, they've got some good stuff. We've sent them some, the West has sent them some HIMARS and some Javelins, all really good stuff. But we've also sent them M13 APCs, the Vietnam era APCs. We sent them rocket launchers from that era. And they're actually using these. They're actually sprinkling this light veneer of technology on top to actually make them hyper useful in that engagement. It does help they've actually got a pathologically useless enemy, and they're very poorly trained, very poorly led, very poorly Russians. So they're really astonishing. And the unfortunate thing about that is the lessons we're taking out of that campaign, especially around tanks. I think are the wrong lessons. We're saying the tank is dead. Well, the Israelis will operate tanks inside of built-up areas, so that ain't true. You just have to be capable and competent, excuse me. So, but if you look at, to me, the platform is starting to matter a lot less. So you put these a little amazing pieces of technology through, from space sensing systems right the way down to drones and other bits and pieces to actually do the justifiers and whatnot. And all of a sudden, these old platforms are actually pretty bloody capable in well-trained hands. So once upon a time I would have said F-15 is an old platform, F-35 is great. I think F-35's got range issues, and I think for Australia it's a poor choice just because of how bloody big we are, to be honest, and how few air bases we've got and all the rest of it. But yeah, and I think I believe it's a Joseph Stalin quote, which is quantity has a quality all its own. So we could have bought 4 times as many F-15s, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Over time, locally modified them once we understood what they were. What we tend to do is we tend to have a whole bunch of requirements and say, no, you've got to modify for this. We bring it to Australia and go, shit, that doesn't quite work right. So I'm not going to modify things. At least operate it for half a decade before you do. So look, I think that anyone who gives any kudos to Australian defence procurement hasn't studied the subject. But so what I'm trying to do is bring what we'll call a sort of a venture scale iteration and mindset to it. So or software venture anyway. So in my game, we invest in a lot of things, and most don't work, and you throw them in the dustbin quite gladly. You follow the ones that do. And we're software, so we iterate quite fast. It's very easy to make changes. When it's hardware, and all military equipment hardware, and hardware is well named, it's really hard when it comes to investing. But anything we can do to speed up the iteration scales, and so for the most part, it will be backing lots of really good entrepreneurs in Australia, teams, people who've actually developed some novel tech, and then ignoring the Australian defence procurement sector and taking them overseas. The fast way to get something sold to the Australian Defence Force is to sell it to the Yanks, the Germans, or someone, and they'll come back with a funny accent. Australians get all jealous and we'll buy it. And I'm being quite, and this is bad. I'm actually being quite assertive, because literally a figurative slap in the face is needed for these people, because it's reaching existential problem time.
This has real world consequences.
Yeah, all your faff around the last 3 decades. This is where we are. We literally have pissed billions against the wall and don't. We've got, and what it leads to is a really good gear. But then you've got one magazine each for each of our Navy ships, and that'll be shot off in the first half. And then, then what do you do?
Well, you mentioned Afghanistan. I think one of the really striking things that I've really taken note of. I mean, I knew this. Everyone kind of knows this in the back of your mind, but wow, is this critical? Is just the sheer volume of ammunition that is being consumed, and the challenge of just resupplying and actually keeping up with the consumption of ammunition. Now, Ukraine is having munitions fed to it from multiple different NATO countries, and they're having to deplete their stocks, and they're having to ramp up their production to try and keep up with the consumption of a war in one part of Eastern Europe. If we actually saw a general war, if we actually saw a Europe-wide war or a Asia-wide war or these sorts of things, I mean, just the industrial base required is insane to think about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're just going through, just prodigious levels of expenditure of ammunition. I'm seeing a YouTube video that one of the Ukrainians that had the Polish crab self-propelled howitzer, which is quite good. And they were saying how that they got it, they only had 4 rounds with the barrel, so they basically got it straight off the poles. And they've now put 3,700 rounds through it. And so what's the barrel life? He says like 1,200. So I've just kept
keep lobbing them.
They get a little less accurate, a little less range. Yeah, you're right. So and I saw another stat yesterday. I think they were saying that, I don't think this is right, because initially the Ukrainians were sent 5,500 javelins. I believe they've been sent more, but the article said that's all it was, and that the US javelins are replenished. Can be replenished no more than 1,000 per year.
Wow,
which is really interesting, right? So, you're right. So, part of I'll bring it back to what I'm doing with Beaten Zone. It's about sovereign. It's about domicile here, headquartered here, able to sell to allies. But what we need, so I think the last 3 years has proved to us the limit, or almost 3 years, has proved to us the limiting extents of globalisation. COVID has basically, every country, quite rightly, in my opinion, that says, no, we'll look after ourselves first. Unfortunately for us, when we went to do that, we just had no capacity to do it. So we have to rebuild that capacity and in defence. So, the levels of expenditure of ammunition is just bloody mind-blowing, to be honest.
Following that industrial capacity thread, one of the reasons, in my opinion, why we've lost so much of our industrial capacity is because of the cost.
I would also say that I wouldn't worry too much, right? Because right now, I think, honestly, for the Yanks probably spent $100 billion, which is not much to them. They've got to borrow it. Yeah. So I pity the poor US kids in the future got to pay for it. But to bleed, they're probably their second biggest global rival, white, in Ukraine. Yeah. It's the cheapest money I'll ever spend. So you're going to spend a war. I mean, they are emasculating the Russian armed forces, and I actually think it's a really good value spend for as crass as it is to talk about that in these terms.
If you just put the cynical geopolitical hat on and put aside the human cost and all of that, which of course in the real world you can't, but if we just look at it from that perspective, I tend to agree. I said at the outset of the Ukrainian conflict, don't look for a good guy here. We've got two of the most corrupt countries on earth now going head to head with each other. I feel a great deal of sympathy for the Ukrainian people. I feel very little for the Ukrainian government. But my preferred outcome would be to see Russia lose the territory that it has gained in this invasion and then have to come to a negotiated settlement between the two. There are people saying, Ukraine should just push into Russia, etc. Well, therein lies nuclear conflict. I really don't think we want to go there. And from Australia's perspective, I don't think it really matters what happens to the Donbass, what happens to Luhansk, etc. That's, from our perspective, what we want to see is Russia get put back in its box and the conflict come to an end. And at the moment, the Ukrainians have done an amazing job, and it looks like we may actually end up in a place somewhat similar to that.
Yeah, I think the best outcome is a different leader in Russia, someone who can then walk back, right? So there's got to be a circuit breaker there, because I believe the Ukrainians will turn the Russians. I've got no doubt about it at all. I think the West will think they'll exercise control. The other part of me says that, yes, there's been prodigious ammunition expenditure, but Vladimir, what's his name, the Ukrainian guy, not the Russian one.
Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yeah, Zelensky. He's not silly. He hasn't fired 5,500 javelins. He's fired 2,750, and the other 2,700 are held back. Right. So for the day that the West go, no, stop. We'll stop providing you weapons. That's okay. I've held half of them back.
Yeah.
You'd have to think you'd be doing that, because you just know if you can follow through that, it's like as soon as they turn the Russians and they start making threats, the arms flows will stop. But I'm not too sure that. So there's that. And the other part of me says, well, or that the weapons have been given, the very high. The high capability strategic weapons, the HIMARS, and other bits and pieces, and similar systems, they have a lot of US intelligence asset in the kill chain, so they can't actually use them effectively. So counter batteries now, like whether counter batteries, you fire a shell, you can backtrack it where it is, and you throw more shells back on top. That used to take a good few minutes in order to actually get a solution. Now it takes a good 10 seconds. For the Ukrainians, excuse me. So if you remove that, then you remove the effect of Ukrainian counter battery, which would be really interesting. I mean, that because Russian artillery is so dominant, so that would actually reset the battlefield as well. So there's hooks and levers on both sides. We shouldn't spend a whole time talking about it, in favour of, because I think the real threat to me in our region is obviously bloody China. They've annexed a region of the ocean the size of the Mediterranean, the South China Sea, for Christ's sakes. They're just not very pleasant, like diplomatically or otherwise, to be truthful. Look what they're doing to Taiwan, a democratic nation of 25 million people, a bit like ours. Hard to ignore if something goes pop there. The one thing I'll say is a lot of their military equipment is patented and licensed off Russian copies.
Yes.
So they must be sitting right now going like, I don't think our tanks are that good. So they can rearm fast. They haven't been rearming. So it's only the last 20 years I've been somewhat independent, but there's large stocks there. So I think that they would take a large dose of, well, okay, let's change this up. And at the moment, still though, they're out to take Taiwan, right? So it's very much a maritime force, and they'll probably do it. There'll be 150,000 dead Chinese Marines in the Taiwan Strait, but they'll take the joint record. Well, that's my feeling.
It's interesting. I've been following a chap. He's an Australian, just judging by his accent, and he doesn't really talk about what he does for a job, but he has alluded to the fact that he is in a position where he understands and has a lot of information relevant to this YouTube channel. And he runs a YouTube channel called Perun, Perun. I don't know if you've come across it, but he just does very, very slow, careful. Let's talk our way through what we can see going on in Ukraine. And sort of goes through whether it's casualty numbers or whether it's equipment or whether it's the changing battle maps or various other things like that. And one of the things that he brought to my attention that I really wasn't aware of is just the amount of corruption and the kinds of corruption in the Russian army. And also...
It's shocking.
Yeah. And the fact that actually a lot of it may well be happening and probably is happening in the Chinese army as well. And these are things like generals lying about how many soldiers they have so that they get paid for more soldiers that don't exist so they can pocket the money. It includes selling off of parts and selling off of weapons onto the black market so that their troops don't actually train with them, but they say they got used and they can pocket them. If that's happening in the Chinese military at the sort of scale we're seeing in the Russian military, well, that really does... I mean, the term paper tiger starts to come to mind for me, but perhaps I'm being too optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of faith when I look at the China situation. On the Russian side, I mean, I remember in the early days of the Ukraine, the special military operation, there was a lot of vehicles being stranded and basically tyres blowing out. And analysis of that was the sidewall blowout, which basically indicates that they just weren't being rotated as they should be there in storage, which... Yeah. Why wouldn't you do that? And the theory was that the people who were in charge of the warehouses were selling the fuel that was allocated for that, so they didn't get to do it. But interesting. If you look at a map of the world, and a map of China, because they are such a large a nation that requires such large volumes of seaborne trade, half a dozen Los Angeles submarines will set that down. The US government will just issue a writ basically saying that it basically put the insurance companies on notice that this is now a war zone. No one in their right mind is going to take a ship into there. Those things prowling around. And you will shut the Chinese economy down. So look, I think there's ways you can bring pressure, but corruption is rife through Russia. I mean, it's kleptocracy. It's a nothingocracy because that might like some sort of democracy, but it's a klepto regime. China's a brutal dictatorship. We just sort of into that Xi Jinping, the former leader, I want to say.
Yeah, Deng Xiaoping. No, he was anyway. Yeah, I know who you mean.
Wasn't that was just awful, ugly?
It's
so how long was he? It's like just kicking the puppy.
Yeah, and to do that, it was so conscious that they were going to do that there in that way for the whole of China to see. Yep. They were definitely sending a message. I want to come back to Australia and the issue of industrial base and the cost of doing business. You mentioned before you're obviously wanting to bring back onshore a certain amount of defence manufacturing, etc., so that we're less vulnerable to supply chain shocks in the event of a conflict. I think that makes perfect sense to me. The question for me is,
I actually want to create a defence innovation industry. I actually want to create a flywheel of people who start businesses, typically high tech. They then become successful, they then exit that, they become wealthy people, and then they recycle themselves back into investing in a new generation. So that is, because I don't think we'll make them here. That's the thing. I think unless we pull ahead on energy and a whole bunch of other stuff, I think we need to make them here. But unless we pull ahead on energy and a whole bunch of other industry sort of policies, as in have no industry policies for Christ's sakes, and we'll do better because the ones we've got right now are fucking us up. Excuse me. So sorry, I interrupted you, Topher.
No. So that's exactly where I was leading with that is the cost of energy, industrial relations, all sorts of environmental restrictions that make it obscenely expensive to develop industrial facilities. These are the reasons why we don't have a manufacturing base and why we would be caught completely flat-footed in a general war where each country starts looking after itself. We would have lots of raw materials and we would lack the capacity to turn those raw materials into anything useful. You talked about obviously blockading China. Well, that starves them of the raw materials. We would be stockpiling the raw materials. We just wouldn't have the ability to actually turn it into something that we can use.
Yeah, we're missing a lot. I mean, so there's obviously little pockets of industry everywhere. So it's not we don't have it, we have enough of it. That's a big thing. So Yeah, I agree. I'm not too sure if there was a question there.
Well, no. So where I'm leading is a topic that you talk about a lot, which is energy policy. And what we're doing with energy policy. You mentioned that we've signed up to net zero, and we've seen liberal governments, so-called, signing up to net zero, etc. What's the consequence of that? Why don't you like that idea?
Well, I don't like interference in markets for the most part. I mean, it's a pretty that's what it is. And when you look at the technology, I'm actually positive one day that renewables of some form. I just can't see wind and solar being it. I just literally, given their energy densities, it's really hard to understand how that's going to be a thing. And I think at some point, what we're using right now will be replaced. The horse got replaced with the car, but we didn't make horses illegal. We didn't tax horses to death, right? There was just a better option that came along. So if it was better and cheaper, this wouldn't be debate. We'd all just be using it, and it'd be a nothing conversation. So it's not cheaper and it's not better. It when it's required, it's not there. The level of overbuild that we have to actually undertake is massive, and with its inherent the transmission issue. You look at your electricity bill; it's like 35% transmission bills. That's not going to ever go away with the amount of transmission that's required. I mean, CSIRO but talking about between $500 billion and $1 trillion to undertake this transition, and people think that won't turn up an electricity bill. Are you mad? Where did that come from?
I'm quite enjoying watching the Greens start to tie themselves in knots here, though, because they've obviously been champions of wind farms. Wind farms need to be sited where there's wind, often in quite wilderness areas, ridge lines where you and I wouldn't be allowed to pitch a tent, but they can put up a 100-meter high wind tower. And then, of course, they have to build the transmission lines. And now they're beginning to eat themselves because those transmission lines are having to go through conservation areas. We've got a pumped hydro dam that's been proposed. I think it's up in Queensland. And now we've got a situation where people
has this for that. But this is how poor journalism is in Australia. Right? As soon as I saw this, it was a Pioneer Dam, 5 gigawatts, right? Now, there's a place I love going to the US. I've been quite a bit. And it's Las Vegas. Just outside Las Vegas is a place called Lake Mead. Lake Mead's a dam behind the Hoover Dam, right? It's the lake behind the Hoover Dam.
I've been there, yeah.
Now, you see how big that is, right? It's a massive, right?
Phenomenal.
Right, 1.2 gigawatts.
Yeah, right.
Now, Palaszczuk gets out there without a single journo doing anything, like him getting their phone, Wikipedia, and saying, "Okay, let's get some comparison. What's 5 gigawatt? It's not 5 gigawatt hours. No, it's not. No, that was the point of that. It was 5 gigawatts. I'm like, and it's going to make that 29. I'm like, and there's still no cooling in this stuff. So what the scientific, the engineering, common sense, the lies that are being told to support this rot. I mean, and the biggest lies, the biggest chorus of lies are coming out of the hydrogen wankers. I just, how hydrogen will ever be something. I mean, the most common sense way to actually transport this stuff is ammonia. Ammonia, for God's sake, because I'm pretty sure we used to use to make phosgene gas in World War One. I might have that wrong, excuse me, but it's pretty bloody poisonous, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I don't get it. And honestly, it all comes back to me in that coming back to the why. And if you fight the why, you get called all sorts of names. And the why is in this cult of climate change. We have 150 years of okay temperature records. We have 40 years of pretty good space records. We have 20 years of excellent ground-based records, and we have like a few thousand to a million years of paleo, which is pretty low fidelity stuff.
Yeah,
and we think we know what's going on. I'm sorry, but and if you look at this whole thing, you look at 150 years of temperature records that we rely on, and that reliable level is going to be changed to obviously increase the catastrophe. That most have been recorded in the Northern Hemisphere. And as a pilot, one thing I've really enjoyed as a pilot, actually, understanding weather more. Now, I'm no meteorologist, but I know I know a lot more about the weather after I started flying than before. Pretty important thing when you jump a plane. But you understand how some of these phenomena work. It's all based on a lot of the weather is based on uneven heating of the Earth's surface, because there's a difference between land and sea, essentially, different forms of land and bits and pieces. And if you look at the Northern Hemisphere compared to the Southern Hemisphere, there's a distinct difference of something. One's got a lot of land, one's got a lot of water. and their thermal properties are amazingly different. Most of those 150 years of temperature recordings have come from the northern hemisphere, where there's least water. And so you just look at these and you just go, oh, none of it feels right. It just. And when you look at these basic things, obviously I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't get an opinion. Fuck them, excuse me, I'll get an opinion. When you can just, and then or you can just say, well, okay, so what temperature should we keep the Earth? At what point do we stop? When we stop the industrial. No. Let's say we stabilise this stuff. We stabilise the temperatures. At what point should we keep it? Who's got the best intelligence for the magic thermostat number we put on the thermostat? See, they can't tell you that because it's actually about this myth of deindustrialising and decarbonising and other carbon for the thing that
to me, it really seems to have become an anti-human cause. It's actually less about the environment now and more about harming humans. Is that just a sort of a misallocation of the focus, or do you think that there's some intention in that?
I think it's very easy to say that I'm an environmentalist to a point. I like going fishing. I don't like polluting the ocean, other bits and pieces. So all human activity on Earth has an impact on it. But what are we impacting? It's a rock that floats in space. We're not going to destroy it, right? So but they use these hyperbolic terms. We're going to destroy the Earth. Well, actually, no, we're not.
It'll continue.
Right, so let's walk back. So what do you think we're actually going to do to it? And there's a great guy, Jonathan Epstein, I want to say. He's wrote a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels.
Right. Yes, I know of the book.
Yeah. And he talks about, it's about human flourishing, and there's this people want to nurture the planet, because they believe the planet's this benign thing that by our presence we actually make quite harmful. So well, no, in reality, it's actually quite harmful thing that with the use of energy and our presence, we actually make quite livable. So, which is 100% true. You just got to look at how people used to live before energy. So it is vastly anti-human. It's ugly, and I think and if you follow the demographics of the world, I think in the next 2 decades we're going to see a hell of a turnaround. We're going to, the mail is that really we're going to see declining populations in China. In most everywhere except Africa, to a degree, and that's because the poor Africans are still that poor, mostly because they have no energy. They're all having 5 and 6 kids to act as farm labourers, right? That's the reality. I mean, that's the reality of being poor is you have kids to help you on the farm, and that is we have to be better to fellow humans than that.
Well, it's fascinating. So there was a demographer, Hans Rosling. He's passed away now, but he was an exceptional communicator, and he was a demographer, and he projected, he was a statistician, and he would take the data from other disciplines and communicate it really effectively. He was of the view that the Earth's population will peak at about 11 billion people. And this idea that we're just going to reach this point where we're all standing on top of each other's shoulders and there's 100 billion people on the planet is just nonsense. As any capitalist would understand, supply and demand is going to shift how people behave over time. About 11 billion people, which is a perfectly sustainable carrying capacity. Anyway, I want to come back. I'm mindful that we've been chatting for a while, and there's a couple of other things I really want to pick your brain on. I read an announcement recently that you, in what I have to presume is a fit of madness, if you could please explain and justify yourself here, you've decided to buy a brand new aeroplane design from a brand new aeroplane manufacturing company when you could have gone elsewhere in the world and bought something off the shelf that would surely have done a similar job. Obviously, I'm being facetious here. There must be very good reasons why you've done what you've done. So tell us about that.
So what I've done is I'm the first production customer for Australian Amphibian Aerospace, who are setting up in Darwin in the Northern Territory. They have bought the rights to the Grumman Albatross, which is a seaplane that was built from 1949 to 1963. I believe there was about 470 that made. So they've actually owned the type certificate, they call it. So they actually own the IP for that aircraft. Yeah. And they're going to remanufacture that. So there's no approvals required to do that. They've just got they need a production certificate for their factory to say that they use all the right lathes and tools and processes and whatnot. And they will start remanufacturing that aircraft with a modern engine. So they'll tap the old banging radials off and replace them with a set of modern PT-67Fs, and probably take out use modern materials on all the non-structural elements of the aircraft, which will make it a good deal lighter. And you'll have a machine that it's an impressive machine. It's people sort of say, why are you buying a seaplane? I'm like, have you looked at it?
That was my next question. Was obviously there's intent there. What is it that what opportunities and possibilities does this open up for you that you didn't have with land-based aircraft?
So you can literally travel around the world in this thing. So there's two elements to my purchase. So the entrepreneur is a chap called Quang. He's a Vietnamese. Came to Australia when he was 6 months old, in the arms of his mum and dad's. He came through Hong Kong, I want to say, as one of the migrant resettling programs. And he loves Australia, literally. And he's had some success in the aviation space. He doesn't like talking in public, unfortunately, because he's got some cracking stories. He basically managed to separate this IP away from Grumman, and he's going to build it in Australia. And he's a bloody patriot. He really is. He's the most amazing man. He wants to bring manufacturing to Australia as well. So I sit there and I asked him, because he wanted me to invest. I don't want to invest. I don't invest in aircraft companies. I'll buy a plane instead. So that's how roughly the conversation went. I said, mate, what makes you think? And there's still a lot of gateways to get through that point yet. So it's the start of a contract, and there's a lot to do. I said, mate, what makes you think we can make this sort of aircraft in Australia? He goes, I won't do his accent, because he's like, I call him Mooney Pons Bogan Vietnamese. So he's very Australian. His accent's very Australian. And he says, Stephen, this is a all pressed metal aircraft, first built in 1949. Why is it you think we can't build it? I thought, and honestly, that just says so much about him. And he loves a challenge. He is an amazing entrepreneur. He'll be, when this project gets up, it'll be herald for Australia. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, right. No, I'm fascinated. Sorry.
Defence applications as well. So can also take 19 angry, well-armed men 1,000 nautical miles and back, without an airfield required, if you know what I mean. So So Chinook like form was probably better than a Chinook, to be honest. Chinook's a little more capable, but different mission profile,
different purposes. Look, I'm fascinated by small aircraft aviation. I had the pleasure of spending a day with Dick Smith. He was pitching to me. He wanted to give me the Wilberforce Award. I don't know if you would have come across that. He was offering $1 million to someone under 30, which I was at the time, who was willing to be the face of a campaign against a big Australia. That's been his, the overpopulation of Australia has been his campaign for quite some time. And he came across my work many years ago, and he was incredibly gracious, man. Flew me up to Sydney. We flew out in his private plane to a country town in New South Wales. He had some business out there, which he attended to, and we talked all the way out. We talked all the way back, and then we jumped in his helicopter and flew from Bankstown Airport and landed in his driveway and spent a couple more hours in his house talking. All the while with him trying to convince me to take $1 million. It was a fairly surreal. You can chat with him. You can ask him. This is all true. And ultimately, for me, I couldn't bring myself to actually agree with what his position was, and therefore I couldn't, in good conscience, take the offer. And as a 30-year-old man, turned down $1 million, which was an interesting day of my life. But what really changed my life was, number one, discovering that Dick Smith is actually a complete gentleman, and I have a lot of time for him, even though we disagree on so many things. The world would be a better place with more Dick Smiths in it. But also, that was my first and so far only time in a helicopter, and it changed my life. It literally changed how I view the world. And you'd know what I mean, because you've spent enough time in small aircraft and at low altitudes, landing, taking off, etc.
Yeah, I've got a helicopter license as well. So,
okay.
And I think I describe people say, what do you like flying with helicopters? And say, it's the most fun you can have with all your clothes on. So
I'm actually completely with you. The thing that blew my mind as well was how incredibly smooth it was. Because, of course, with it,
there's plenty of days when it's not.
Well, okay, sure, but you get in a light plane. Like, I know how much you get tossed around in a little single engine or a twin engine, Cessna. I've been in a few of them with some of the projects I've done crisscrossing inland Australia. But the helicopter just has this way of kind of cutting through the turbulence and kind of smoothing it out.
You had a good day. You had a good day.
Yeah, you reckon? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, think about helicopter. You're always flying low in an helicopter too. I've never seen so many. So I've flown like Cessna 172, 182s. I've owned 210s. I've had twin turbines, the whole thing. I haven't owned a helicopter yet, but I've flown a lot, and I've never, you're sitting there flying along. Yeah, cool. Oh, eagle. Just close, probably 300 kilometers an hour, right? So you see a lot of wildlife. But if it's a turbulent day, helicopters are horrible. If it's a turbulent day, any light aircraft. I mean, the lighter they are, the more they get tossed around because they're light.
Of course,
it has more effect on them. So
maybe I was just lucky, but it was magic carpet ride. It was just the most life-changing thing. It was incredible. I've been addicted ever since.
But I actually got to meet Dick Smith as well. I went to a transportation conference, and I think it was a Cessna Caravan break. It was an aviation conference or something, Australian Regional Aviation Forum, I think it was.
Sure.
Down the Gold Coast, down at I can't remember the Rural Pines. Sorry, yeah, and I was speaking about flying cars, and so I still think there's a real efficacy for basically think about a quadcopter drone. Gross that up so you can put a couple of people in it, basically.
Yes.
And there's a lot of efficacy through that, and it will come. The batteries and other bits and pieces are issues at the moment, infrastructure. But the noise, I still can't understand how the noise is going to factor. But I think we'll get through that. And Dick Smith was in the audience and came up after and said g'day, which I thought was just lovely.
Nice.
And I had to thank him. I said when I was 14, 15 years old, I paid $2 for your Dick Smith catalogue. Which is the catalogue was like the white. It was just the most amazing reference for. It sold his stuff, but it's the most amazing reference for everything electronic. You could almost do an electronics apprenticeship out of his catalogue.
Yeah.
So like that gave me the desire to go and do an electronics apprenticeship and set me off on a course. So I was chuffed. I got a chance to say thank you to him. So it was lovely.
Yeah, that's amazing. On this quadcopter flying car thing, obviously flying cars have been 10 years away for 50 years now. But have you come across in New Zealand, there's a mob, they call themselves Black Fly.
Yep.
And
I've seen a black fly. It's an ugly looking thing.
I see. I agree the first time I saw it, and then the longer I looked at it, the more I went, actually, the engineering on this is just beautiful, because what they've done is they've solved the vertical rotor, horizontal rotor problem without any mechanical moving parts. I mean, you look at something like an Osprey and how much money and technology and design had to go into rotating those engines to be able to take off vertically and then fly horizontally.
It rotates 7 horsepower. It's a bit of a tough ask, isn't it, really? So,
well, yeah, that's right. Whereas with the Black Fly, they've just gone, well, why don't we actually design it so that the whole thing rotates? It's all fixed. There's none of these sort of joints and rotating parts, etc. And the more I looked at it, the more I fell in love with it. And once that is actually ready to go, I hope to have earned enough money to be able to buy and own something along that line. I just think it's such a beautiful thing from an engineering point of view.
Max payload's 90 kilos and I'm 92 and noise the hell out of me.
I'm even heavier, so it's probably not going to be the version that they're currently working on. But at some point, actually, here's another one for you. Have you come across the Solera 500L?
I have actually, yeah. I have. It's an electric one, isn't it?
No. It's that's the one where they've gone extreme on the laminar airflow design force. Yeah. It's a really fat body. It's got a 500 horsepower diesel. Avgas motor in the back with a push prop. And these really almost like glider-like wings. Does any of that make sense to you? How do you rate their claims?
Oh, I think that the amount of drag that gets assumed and there's a lot of lazy drag in an aircraft design.
Sure.
To be honest. So there's a saying in aviation, it's called the search for micro knots. So you can do all sorts of things. You can do flap gap seals and you can do micro vortex generators and this sort of stuff. And you just everyone's out there trying to eke an extra knot out of their 182 or 210 or something.
Yeah.
So they're literally out papering over a problem. So if you start with a lot more of an aerodynamic shape, for example, so I'm pretty sure the Solera, it's actually got there's no cockpit, so to speak. So it's actually a bullet-shaped nose, essentially, isn't it? Yeah. That would cut out so much drag. So yes, I think you can do that. There's a mob in Sydney called Micro Tow, Henry from Micro Tow. They make it. They call it a shark skin coating. So literally, it's a low drag coating, and you can take about 10-15% of the drag out of an aircraft.
Wow.
Yeah,
Just out of
on the various on the coating, yeah. So literally, it comes out looking like a overhead projector slide, and it's actually quite rough, but it's very sort of nano nano structures on there.
Okay.
And yeah, no, it's sort of cool stuff. So you could take a 10-15% there, take that, fold your legs up, have an efficient engine, just like I said, let enough flow the shit over, just have no rivets.
Yeah.
And the rivets must drag 5 or 6 knots out of aircraft. You look at it, you just the waste of just the drag on those. It's annoying as hell.
Well, I remember reading the biography some years ago of the test pilot of the Spitfire, and he actually was the test pilot of the Spitfire all the way through the war, I think there were 42 different sort of variations on it over the course of the war. And one of the abiding stories that stuck with me is he tells the story of how they were trying to make decisions around how many flush rivets to do, but flush rivets required a lot more effort and time than your normal pop rivets that had like that sort of half P kind of thing sticking out. And so what they did was they manufactured an entire plane using the flush rivets. Now, actually, was this on the Spitfire or was this a different aircraft?
Someone started a vacuum cleaner next to me. Can you hear that, or is that still okay?
Oh no, it's fine. I can still hear you okay. Okay, I'm now second guessing myself whether he was telling a story about a different aircraft, because the Spitfire was mostly cloth. No,
it was
cloth. Anyway, he tells this story about some aircraft. I'm going to retract that it was a Spitfire, but he tells a story about an aircraft. And what they did to test it was they made the entire aircraft as a test aircraft using flush rivets, and then glued split peas where all the rivets were, and moved around and changed where they had them. And he'd fly the aircraft and they'd measure the performance and stick it in a wind tunnel and have a look at what these split peas did to figure out where to invest the time of doing the flush rivets versus just having normal rivets. And that was a big enough issue that they invested all that R&D time into it. So that's what you're talking about with people with their own planes now, the micronauts.
Yeah, micronauts, but the Soleras, and there's a bunch of aviation concepts out there that are really going for that speed and efficiency. And there's even guys that like electric engines on anything other than at the moment, just because the battery life. I respect it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The Red Bull guys talking about it just because the amount of torque they put through those, and the races are like 10, 15 minutes. So the range profile is just awesome for these Red Bull races. So that'd be pretty cool. So there's applications technology everywhere. Just this is the energy sector, right? There's applications for that for turbines and off-grid and solar and all the rest of it. We've just tried to smear it across everywhere and enforce its use. And then basically we can't speak truthfully about how shit it is. So
now, so you mentioned it. You mentioned earlier that when you were in the military, you had this idea and you wanted to move across into sort of tech. Was that the pipe networks that you then went on to sell, or was there another project before that?
No, the first business was in Adelaide. It was an internet dial-up internet service provider called SENet.
Okay.
Started that in November '94. Sold that in 2001, 2011. Okay. I want to say so. We sold in two tranches in two separate lots.
Yeah.
And then came back in 2001. Met up with an old schoolmate, and we started Pipe Networks.
Yeah. Now that became obviously very successful. We won't go into that. Anyone can read about that online. Tell me about the decision to actually become a public figure, the whole Shark Tank thing, etc. Was there strategy behind that in terms of what you wanted to achieve in terms of sort of public communications, etc., or was it just a lark that you thought, hey, this will be fun? What was sort of the reasoning behind saying yes to that?
So I was doing advocacy on behalf of early stage tech entrepreneurs in Brisbane, and I'd been given a really generous a meeting with the Premier at the time, Campbell Newman. I've subsequently become really good friends with him. He doesn't remember this, so maybe I'm just embellishing it. I can't, but it's somewhat clear in my head, so I'll tell the story anyway. But in the same meeting was a chap from QUT, and he was a professor of entrepreneurship from QUT. So I got to this meeting, and everything I said, this guy just went me. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was just some uneducated yob who just had successful businesses accidentally or something. And literally I thought to myself out of that, I thought, I can't be given such a generous opportunity again and have to explain myself for the first 25 minutes out of 30. I need to deal with that guy within 5 minutes, and he can just, say my record speak for so fuck off back to university, right? So sheltered workshop, excuse me, but anyway, so I engaged a PR firm and basically said, look, I want to actually increase my profile. I want to doing this stuff. I wanted I gave them a target of 5 articles in the mainstream press every month. We mostly hit that, but we're doing that for a few months, and then they booked the show. I actually knew of the Shark Tank opportunity, but I didn't like the Shark Tank TV format. I really enjoyed Dragons Den from the UK. Didn't like the US Shark Tank one. I thought they were hyper aggressive. And that first season, US Shark Tank was horrible. I said, no, I don't want any part of it type thing. And they persisted with me. And they said, someone from the TV or someone from the production company contacted me and said, look, something more like up to season 3 at that stage, I want to say. And Mark Cuban came in and watched that and thought, I don't like that format. So I went and did my, I thought it was an interview. Apparently it's an audition when there's a TV camera involved, apparently.
Yeah, screen test,
Yeah, that's it. But I was doing some training. I bought a new aircraft. I was doing some training out at Archerfield, and I was training up a couple of instructors as well. And I was sort of the second person to go because I had that little audition first up. So I'll let these guys go and do their shit first. And the instructor got in the aircraft and turbine engine, started everything in the wrong order, set one of the engines on fire, basically just, smoke everywhere and stuff. So I'm sitting there. There's a windmill and propeller in the background. There's $1 million being blown out the tailpipe in this aircraft, for Christ's sakes, right? And I'm looking at the camera, and I was filthy, absolutely filthy. And so I rang back about a week later and said, we were after 6 sharks, and you were the 5th best shark. I'm like, oh, fuck. You were after 5 sharks. All right, you were the 6th best shark. I'm like, fuck off. What was the real reason? Give me the real reason. I talk too fast. I slur my words. There's lots of reasons not to have me on TV. Let me know so I can maybe think about improving. And went backwards and forwards and told them go and jam it, basically, because they weren't telling me the truth. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a phone call basically saying, hey, do you want to be in Shark Tank? And I'm like, doesn't it start filming next week? And this is on a Tuesday morning. I was flying to Melbourne at the time. I said, no, Thursday day after tomorrow. So I had 2 days notice. So I got back to Brisbane the next day. The Thursday morning, flew to Sydney. They took me to R.M. Williams store at Bondi Junction, bought me a pair of RMs and a belt, and threw me on TV, basically.
So you didn't even choose your own wardrobe; it was all controlled.
No, I didn't mind it. I'd never worn RMs before. Actually, I thought they were pretty good clothes, so I didn't mind them at all. But so it was a pretty safe choice. In subsequent years, I did. You find out what more you can put your foot down with as you do it more. But we didn't. So we started negotiating the contract, and I didn't sign it until about 6 weeks after we finished filming. It was quite funny. I'm like, what if I don't sign this, guys? What can I extort out of this? But no, it was a great process. It's the first season was 4.5 weeks in the studio, and then the subsequent 3 seasons were about 3.5 weeks. And on those other subsequent ones, we actually moved down as a family. We moved down. The first one I sort of flew in and flew out. I came back on the weekends, and then I think in season 3 the twins turned up. I want to say it must have been season 3 the twins turned up. And so actually no, in season 4, so I flew and flew out as well. Actually, that's right, yeah. But for the most part, we moved down. Live in Sydney. Yeah, I don't mind visiting Sydney, but as long as you live on the harbour or something like that. Otherwise, you're just stuck in traffic.
Sydney's a great place to live if you've got a bit of money and you can live the good version of Sydney. If you're out in the west, in the middle of nowhere, Sydney, then just keep going west and don't stop until you reach Perth or something, because you're going to be much better off. So one of the things I've always been curious about when I've watched Shark Tank is what percentage of the ideas that get pitched to the sharks actually end up on the show? Because obviously there's a lot of people who want to pitch ideas who never get that far. But how many actually do a pitch to the sharks and then still don't make it on the show?
I can't. So in the first year, we had the 4.5 weeks. It was 120 something odd pitches. Wow. So I kept a little tally of how many I offered and invested in and stuff. I couldn't remember what that was now. I've got it written down somewhere in a notepad back in my office, I think. Yeah. But I would say, and there was 13 episodes and probably about maybe 8 minutes. So that's maybe 5 or 6 per episode.
So there's a bunch that have hit the cutting room floor.
Oh, yeah, a bunch were terrible. A bunch deserve to. I mean, you have borderline criminals come in, and actually not even borderline, some fucking proud criminals come in basically and picture. And you have and some are just you think to yourself like, oh, for God's sake, please, Channel 10, don't put that will just destroy that person's life. Please don't put it on TV because they just come in, they're hopeless. And I sort of can't shut up, so I just tell them how hopeless they are and stuff.
So one of the things that fascinates me is what kind of a mind and what kind of a person decides to actually become an entrepreneur. Because we all know the statistics. The success rate is incredibly low. Of the businesses that do survive beyond 5 years, 10 years, the ones that truly become success stories, exiting for hundreds of millions of dollars, these sorts of stories are such a minuscule proportion of the attempts. I'm guilty of a couple of unsuccessful attempts myself. COVID, unfortunately, has done a huge amount of damage to a project that I've been working on for 6 years, and its future is looking very, very doubtful now. It's an incredibly high-risk thing to do. Why did you decide I can beat those odds? Because you have beaten those odds, but did you know in advance that you would?
No, I don't think. I think you think that hard about it when you start. I'm not too sure. Maybe I mean, back when I started in '94, it was. I often say that we're either business owners or managing directors, and now you're a founder and a CEO. It's all very, and I was a businessman, and then somewhere in 2003, someone called me an entrepreneur. I thought, I suppose I am. I saw an opportunity, and I thought. So I was in the army from '87 through '95, as I mentioned already.
Yeah.
I had a really good boss in my business. I actually started my business in the army. Had a good boss. Who I went back and said, look, sir, my business is going great. I need to get out. And we fashioned a deal. He got me out about 6 months early, which was great.
Yeah.
I had to just display good behaviour, you might say. Peter Shanks, don't forget him. He was a great man. So I saw a problem, and I knew I could do something about it. And I knew there was value in there. I didn't know exactly how much. So that first business there was SENet. We sold that. Ended up taking on a business partner, a bloke I'm still really good mates with, Chris Foote. Came back to Brisbane in 2001. We kicked off Pipe Networks. I was sort of determined not to get back into business again. So I left the army at about 90 kilos. Got to 135 at my worst, to be honest, if you know what I mean. So I let myself go quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that only sort of changed in the last sort of just when my daughter turned up here 9 years ago. So, so I don't know. I obsessed a bit about business and probably grip on a bit too hard. But with Pipe Networks, there was an opportunity once again. I had a fair bit of experience in that space, my previous business, and probably from about month 14 to maybe 18 months in, we knew we were onto something. That was at some point we sort of you had that. Oh my God, this is going to be huge. So that was. Right. Did you ever think it would be before? You hope it would be, I suppose. But we're starting it then. The world had just come out of the dot-com smash. It was a cracker. I mean, everyone thinks the GFC was big, but no. That was also good because we were buying equipment for our business like at 2 cents in the dollar.
Yeah, right.
Everyone was just kicking out the door, right? They just, if you could transport it away, you could take it. So no, so look, it's and actually Glenn Richards from Shark Tank, he's a lovely, probably the nicest man alive, but his family's even nicer than him. It's incredible. But he has this saying, which is the engineer who has an entrepreneurial brain fart, or the technician with an entrepreneurial brain fart, which is very much, if you're into books at all, a chap called Gerber has a book called The E-Myth, where E stands for entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur myth, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's a large theme of his book as well. It's a very simple book to read. I recommend it. Anyone looking at it. It's a very simple book.
I don't have it on this bookshelf. I've got it on my other bookshelf.
No, hopefully mine's over there somewhere. It might be in the office. I'm not too sure where mine is. So, but I do a lot of encouraging. I did a lot of talking to schools and younger groups about people getting into business, and the hardest thing is starting. Peter Thiel wrote a book called From Zero to One, which is not quite about this, but it's sort of about this. The hardest thing is just going from 0 to 1, is starting. And he puts a lot more to it than that, don't get me wrong. Sure. But after you start, then the next hardest thing is finding a customer and staying focused and sending bills and collecting money, and then staff, and if you don't want it, if you don't want to be challenged, don't get into business because you spend nothing.
Yeah.
Public service and just have a veggie life.
Yeah.
Should I? That's a bit rude.
So we're in a phase right now economically. Inflation has ticked up. The inflation that they said wasn't going to happen has happened, and then they said it's going to be transitory, and now it's starting to look pretty long term for a transitory bit of inflation. The cost of living, of course, it's one and the same. It's gone through the roof. A lot of people
the papers in Australia are talking about how they think they've seen the end of the inflationary spike, so to speak. They might be starting to level out. I'm like, energy prices haven't even started to impact us yet, right? And where goes the energy price goes, food price goes everything. I mean, fancy making that prediction when we know that we are probably going to double, if not, we're probably going to double in the next 5 years, electricity bills. What a load of toss.
And these are the same people that said that inflation wasn't going to happen in the first place. So I'm going to take their advice with a grain of salt. But what we're hearing increasingly from predictable corners of society is this mantra that capitalism has failed. This idea that, your cost of living is going up because capitalism has failed. Energy prices, of course, have gone through the roof because privatization and capitalism have failed, you understand. It's not because it's one of the most overregulated and micromanaged industries on earth. It's capitalism has failed. I know from your Twitter and from following you for a while, you are very much a capitalist. Can you explain what that means as you use the term, and why you actually think that capitalism works and isn't the failure that some people are now trying to say it is?
So when I describe myself as a capitalist, it's usually with this saying that when we invest in businesses, people think I'm going to come and help them run their business. And so you don't understand, I'm a capitalist, not an industrialist.
Yeah, right.
I don't want to participate in your business. I want to provide you the capital to actually take your business forward. So I don't have any classical education with respect to what capitalism means, but for me, a large part of it, and you started this talking a little bit about conservatism and libertarianism. A large part of this is about sort of, I regard myself as sort of centre-right libertarian, conservative, conservative economic views, not so much social views, not as much social views anyway. So for me, things just work better when markets are left alone. And it's hard to pick an example that doesn't happen. Well, at the extremes, things are always shit. Don't get me wrong on both ends. But in the one of the an example of today, or of these recent times, would be oil and energy prices, especially oil and fossil fuel prices. Essentially, it's like OPEC controlling it. Well, no, if we just had more of it, it would cost less. So it's a bit like, to me, the debate up here in Queensland with respect to housing, with diabolical housing availability. And the amount of housing regulation on landlords is just point stupid. Like, literally, if someone moves in without a pet and you say no pets, and they say yes, and they get a pet, you can't stop them from having a pet. I mean, that is, and so the level of ridiculous, and for some reason they're saying, well, that landlords aren't making housing stock available. Well, I wonder why. You've made this damn near impossible, land tax and everything else. So, if you want more houses, encourage people to build more houses. It's a bit tough.
Crazy, right?
Crazy. So people sort of, it's that. I suppose a lot of my reactions aren't driven from being capitalist; they're basically driven from being practical. If there's lots of things in the market, then they'll be cheaper. If there's less things in the market, they'll be more expensive. If you suppress suppliers in the market, and they won't invest, and therefore things will get more expensive. So it's not born out of some highfalutin. Although I have done a lot of reading on economics, other bits and pieces since, but I think my basic instinct just comes from that. For the most part, you need to let capitalists flourish to the point of destructive monopoly should be stopped. But you should let capitalists flourish.
It's really interesting to me. We saw John Howard, who, as I mentioned earlier, when I grew up, he was kind of the Holy Grail, part of the Trinity. We saw him try and fix the housing affordability crisis, as it was described way back in the early 2000s, by introducing the first homeowners grant. And I remember someone
cavalcade of crap ever since, hasn't it?
Oh gosh, someone tried to broaden my mind way back then, and I rejected it back then, but I now can see in hindsight they were absolutely right, and I was an idiot. They said to me, you don't fix an imbalance in supply and demand by increasing demand. If we've got a housing affordability crisis, it's because there's not enough supply. You don't fix that by increasing demand. Yeah. But we've seen Labor, Liberal, state, federal, we've seen them doubling and tripling down on this. We'll subsidise the buyer, we'll give grants, we'll do all of this sort of stuff. Why don't we see more houses? Surely if capitalism was working, there's a price incentive there for people to build houses. Why aren't we?
Look, the one thing I don't invest in, we used to have houses and real estate back before we had one of our big exits, and it just, for the hassle, it got to be too much. And I don't get real estate, to be honest. I think it's got somewhat Ponzi elements to it in Australia, to be honest, I think personally. So although I'm big on adding value and stuff, but I think the housing market, real estate market's a bit circular. So lots of stuff in there. So I think that the home owners stuff, all the grants, and just phenomenal. Just we keep pouring money on there, and I agree with what you're saying there. We're basically increasing demand and not supply. That's a huge issue. I think the other thing is that it's actually just making our society more expensive, because what the building construction industry needs is a good bushfire through it. And every time the economy gets into trouble and tradies get laid off, which is I don't wish hard times on anybody.
Sure.
At some point, if you've got a poorly performing industry and it's being taken over with public funds, then we need to put a brush fire through and work out who should be left afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So it's never had that cleansing impact. And you see the occasional shitty building go under. We need far more of that. So to me, there's some form of unholy, and I don't go for conspiracy theories, but I think there's some form of unholy sort of cogs that whilst independent, tend to be synced together accidentally with respect to land availability, the over-regulation, lack of transport coordination for these corridors and other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
But, if you were czar for a day, what would you want for a day? If it was czar for a year, what would you do? I would put every piece of public land up to a developer and let them go and develop it.
Yeah.
Just open the cupboards, they're done. Look, there we are. Or at least triple or quadruple what goes out there at this point in time, right? So it's open, done. You would literally just take an absolute gas axe to regulation for this stuff. Just gas axe the hell out of it, right? And just make it really inexpensive to build houses. This is tough, right? Because this is going to collapse people's retirement nest eggs too. That's the other issue. We've got the house, the mum and dad have got the house, the grandparents are at the house, and there's their retirement nest egg. So collapse that price, it's going to have societal impacts too. So we've got a problem that we're having to drag behind ourselves, which makes it hard to fix the root cause of many issues.
I was about to interject with that exact challenge. That it is, once we get into these messes, whether they're inflationary messes, whether it's government debt messes, whether it's housing bubble messes, fixing them hurts a certain percentage of people, which in a democratic country where people can then vote according to the person that's promising not to hurt them, it gets more and more difficult to fix these problems. Are you of the view that from a national debt point of view, from a welfare point of view, and I'll put my cards on the table, I'm concerned that we've gone past the point where we can wind this back simply because people won't vote for someone who's going to wind it back. Do you share that, or would you challenge that?
No, I think, look, we just last election, it was one of maybe a $275 power promise, for Christ's sake, which was fantasy. It turns out people are cheap to buy. And, let's face it, there was 9 years of coalition, and it was a pretty piss-poor coalition government.
Yes,
and what we found out after with that maniac in his portfolios is just not indeed with anybody. But so there was a lot to detest them for, that's for sure. So it's gone too far, which is there's some root causes here. I think that in a free market sense, how do you fix this? How do you maybe suggest some ideas to fix some of this stuff? To me, I think we should devolve income tax and powers back to the states.
Yep. Okay.
We should retain the ATO as the mailbox that you send your money to, and the feds need money, so they'll take the bottom 5%, the bottom X. They'll take a little bit off the bottom. And the states write to the ATO and say, we all tax this income bracket at this and this. So they get to raise their own money.
Yeah.
So we align incentives, we align pain. So when the states are spending and the states spend so much of the money, they get to, and then you can have some competition between states.
Yeah, some competitive federalism.
Yeah, so bringing back bring back competition. I mean, when I love America. I have 3 daughters are born in America, for example. I lived there for a year, and people sort of, when I tell entrepreneurs about going to America, because it's Australia's like 1% of the world's GDP, I'm like, what are you doing here? Okay, make a company here, but for God's sake, start selling out elsewhere. They said, but there's issues there. I said, there's 9,000 something taxation jurisdictions in the US, and they're aghast. And I said, yeah, but Americans consider that a feature, not a bug.
That's right.
So you actually get the ability, whereas in Australia, the only choice of where you want to live is weather.
Yeah.
You get a choice about your land tax, or it might be land tax, might have a state one still. But for the most part, income, all the taxing and all those financial, they're all the same. We've homogenized the shit out of this joint, and it's just, and there's no real choice. So bring back some competitive federalism, and you'll start seeing some, you'll start seeing some good stuff. And a lot of these things won't go. You'll probably fix 70% of the problem, to be honest, and we can probably live with 70% being fixed.
Yeah. It'd be a big improvement. I'm quite a fan of the idea of Rexit. I don't know if you've come across this concept, that particularly the Murray River, so northern Victoria, that whole water catchment, northern Victoria, and a lot of inland southern New South Wales should actually become the Murray state, a separate state, with a capital in Albury.
Bunch of Murrays.
Yeah. So I've got a big soft spot for that part of the world. I've been covering water issues for 13 years, and the Murray-Darling Basin specifically I've been covering in detail since 2012, the Water Act of 2007, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, the complete clusterfuck that whole thing has become. And I'm quite a fan, for competitive federalist reasons, I'm quite a fan of the idea of actually supporting movements to increase the number of states, and then as you've said, to actually give back to those states more powers to be able to compete with each other and create a differentiation between them. I know after the bushfires there were around Mogo and southern coastal, the south coast of New South Wales, there was a push there to try and create a special economic zone for bushfire recovery, etc. I'm not such a fan of carve-outs. I would much rather see it happen at a state level or at that sort of level. But what we don't have in Australia is the ability for a jurisdiction to actually do better than anybody else. There's talk of a Murray state. There's talk, of course, regularly of Western Australia seceding.
Even without the state. So, like, when you look at so the reason when the federal government provide a lot of infrastructure assistance to states, it's done through loans. So they literally have a loophole around the Constitution, because the Constitution says the federal government can't bias one state over the other. And I sort of, I'm paraphrasing the shit out of this. I don't know actually what it says, but that's how it was sort of explained to me by a smarter person once.
Sure.
And I like that in the Constitution. I think it's a good thing, right? That should happen. But as a result now, so they can't sort of say, right, so we have a problem. We have too many people living in Sydney, for example, right, or Melbourne, wherever. We have all this water and all this infrastructure, north of Mackay in Queensland. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the income taxing rate, north of the Tropic of Capricorn at maximum cap at 30 cents on the dollar. You'd empty Sydney into North Queensland.
Yeah.
But the feds can't do that because it's biased in states. But whereas if the state can do that, the state can say, well, we've got this taxing power, but now if you actually live north of the Tropic of Capricorn, we'll do this, for example. So there's no, it lacks innovation in government. We've robbed innovation in government. So even I've never thought about adding extra states, to be honest, but I've always thought about it in terms, and you hear a lot of people sort of saying we should abolish states. I'm like, oh my fucking God. No, I'm with you on that. Could you imagine, like, I live here in Brisbane. Can you imagine like having to, or someone where I come from in Rockhampton, having to, they send their local representative's got to go into Canberra, right, and pitch for money for a hospital from Canberra against Brian Harradine or some wallet from an over-senated state like Tasmania, excuse me, if you know what I mean. You'd be stuffed. No, I think that the more responsive government closer to people is better. There's ways to make that less expensive, but I think more government closer to people is better.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And look, the American federalist system does devolve powers down to those smaller jurisdictions. We invest power upwards into the federal government. Our constitution's explicit on that. Where there is a conflict between federal and state law, the federal law wins. whereas the US federal constitution took a different approach, saying here are the powers that the federal government has, and anything that we haven't given is reserved to the states. And they kind of went the other way, and I think that was probably the better choice. But changing our constitution at this point is probably not going to work too well. And if we tried, I'd be afraid of it being hijacked by people with terrible ideas. Anyway.
Section 92, where it says intercourse between the states must be free. I think we just add into that and unhindered.
Yeah.
Like never get locked out between states ever again.
What we've done with our constitution is dead letter in many respects now. Look, we've been going for an hour and 24 minutes. I don't want to finish though without asking you what's next for Steve Baxter. Obviously, successful entrepreneur. You're now a TV star. Are you going to do an Elon Musk and try and pull yourself out?
Watched that B grade celebrity TV stuff.
Hey, at least you made it to B grade. I'm not even there.
So for me, I've got a young family, pair of 5-year-olds and a 9-year-old. And we've got lots of first world problems. All health's great. We're so lucky in that respect. Yeah. I do have the personal feeling right now. When I was in school, and since I'm a huge fan of modern history. And it really feels like it's in the 30s. I mean, I'm 34, 35 at the moment. It really feels like we've got tyrants on the march. We've got societies embracing, stupid ideas like socialism and communism. And we've got disenchanted societies, and you've got wars as well. So it's not feeling great.
I ain't going to argue with you.
Hence why I've taken it upon, I'm looking at doing the beaten zone ventures. And, so it's lethal, near lethal sovereign defence investing. And so for me, it's going to be about pushing that cart and making sure that we've actually got a country that can really stand on its own 2 feet in the defence realm as much as possible. So that'll occupy a fair bit of what I do there. That's probably it. Probably the next 5 years for me at the very least, maybe 10 years. 52 soon, so I don't know. I never thought I'd reach 50. Not that I thought I was ever going to die, but to me, when you're young, when you have your first full-time, when you're a regular soldier, 15 years old, you don't think about 50.
No, not at all.
So, and I got there and I went, oh man.
I remember when I was going through a recruit course at Kapuka, and I was 20 or 21, I can't remember. And there was a chap there who was 35 or 36. He was right at the upper limit of the age of entry. And I just remember looking at him and going, you are such an old man. What is going through your mind that this geriatric old man would choose to join the army? And now I got to know him a little bit, and he had a pretty tough personal circumstance, and he'd literally done it because at his IQ, it was just one of the few ways that he could reliably provide for his kids. And that had become the most important thing in the world for him, and he chose to join the military. And I got to respect him for that. He was willing to do whatever it took within his capability to do the right thing by his kids. But I remember that perception of him, 36, oh gosh, what an old man. I'm 40 now. And yeah, I wouldn't want to go and join the military for lots of different reasons, but it's not as old as what it seemed back then. Do you anticipate, here's a curly one for you, do you anticipate growing old and dying and being buried in Australia, or does something in you make you think it might be somewhere else?
God, I never thought about that, Topher. I'd love to live overseas again. So we lived overseas in 0809 for a year. I worked with Google in California for a year. For various sort of medical reasons. Our kids are all born in the US. So I'd love to live back there again, to be honest. I really do enjoy it. I love it. They are not as, we're selfish here. We are selfish. So, and I love the place, don't get me wrong. I'll carry a rifle. I'd carry a rifle again for, they'd be pretty desperate to want me to carry a rifle again, but I'd do it if they needed it. But yeah, I'd love to live in the US again for a while, but I think it's more to give the kids a bit more of a global experience, to be honest.
Yeah, a different perspective. Yeah.
But
the reason I ask is because it's not a question I'd asked myself at all until COVID. And I've just found myself sitting there going, actually, if this country really is full of the people that it now appears to be full of and is heading the direction that it now appears to be heading, then maybe this isn't the place where I want my children and my grandchildren to be calling home.
Yeah, I had those thoughts as well. Like, during COVID, I thought, I'm going to go buy 200 hectares of land out of Jimboomba. I'm just going to put like 9 strands of barbed wire up and do this. At some point, my fellow citizens, 51% of my fellow citizens are going to be going to jail out of the 49, and that's just I'll fight that one to the end. And so I don't like that either. That's why I like the US. The fact they've got those first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights, right? They've got the Bill of Rights, and it's just is it 8 or 10, whatever it is, the Bill of Rights.
It's the first 10, the Bill of Rights, Look, I haven't.
It enshrines it. It enshrines it. It's the fact that, that these things, and they struggle with that, and laws attempt to override it. But for the most part, their court system brings it back onto par, right? No, you can't do that. The rule of law does actually exist. So where here it's like, health bureaucrats got way too much say in the last 2 years, and that scared the shit out of me.
It's been insane. Look, Steve, this has been a pleasure, and thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. And I do appreciate it. You're a busy man. You're on a plane tonight and heading off around the country and doing various other things, and so I really appreciate you making the time. Is there anything you would want to sort of leave my audience with? Obviously, a lot of people from Victoria watch my work. I'm in Victoria myself, and I can tell you I won't be in Victoria for a whole lot longer, but we're here for now. I've got a baby due in just a couple of days, and because of my wife's health or birthing challenges, we have to be near the Monash Health for that, because things have gone wrong in the past. So we've got to stay in Victoria for that, and we're looking at moving to Albury in the near future. But a lot of people are feeling pretty hurt, disappointed by the outcome of the Victorian election a couple of weekends ago. And a lot of Australians are asking themselves some pretty serious questions. In that context, I'd love to hear your last thoughts before we wrap up.
Well, look, mate, good luck to you and your wife.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that your first one or?
Third.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, thoughts to Victorians. Look, I can't fathom how you could retain that man. I can't look at him. I can't look at his face.
Neither can we.
I have more revulsion for Justin Trudeau for what he did those poor people protesting in Canada. So I don't, and I think it's emblematic of things we were talking about before, right? About what people have agreed here. What can be done? There's just some incredibly nasty people who hate others and are willing to exercise control at any point. So for Victorians, look, I spent 3 years over in Wodonga, which I'm just barely in Victoria.
Barely in Victoria, yeah.
Lovely, Hume Weir, Hume Dam, lovely place to fish and swim and stuff. Cold as hell in the winter. So, last thoughts, I don't know. I've decided to stay and do something. Like I'm literally putting. I'm blessed to have had some success and some luck in life. So I'm going to put some personal family capital in behind trying to make it a better place and with respect to that. So I think everyone in their own way can do something. I always hark back to Jordan Peterson, to be honest. It's like, what can you do at clean your damn room, I suppose, but what can you do initially around you that can give you some control back? Then once you've got that under control, how can you then step outside that a little bit and help someone else? And if we all did a lot more of thinking about others, but looking after ourselves first in a very genuine way and helping others, then I think that we'd be a lot better off. So I just don't forget each other. Politicians, they'll come and go. Hopefully he'll be damned to history. It's a lot better than he deserves. But what gets me is no one's yet talking about a royal commission into COVID. At root and branch, royal commission, every level of government, every decision needs to be. We have spent how many hundreds of billions, and we're not going to. I'm happy to drop a bill on a royal commission that went for a couple of years, because my fear is, I wouldn't be happy, but I'd tolerate it, you might say. My fear is that we've learned all the long lessons. The lessons are, oh no, we can just lock down till the magic vaccine turns up, and we can just inject this into arms and threaten to sack people. And it's like, oh my God, because no one's. That's the, especially after the Victorian election. My God, that's the clear political answer too. Sorry, mate. That wasn't very clear, was it?
No. Look, but we have to be realistic. I'm not here to sell false hope or give people a skewed perspective. This is the reality. We're in very serious times, and for Victoria more so, but for the whole of Australia, I would argue we're in very serious times. And I think you're absolutely right. Look after yourself, and then from that place of strength, look after those around you and build that community.
Well, I think you can just hold on for the next few years as we do this great big Thelma and Louise drive off the energy cliff. All right, yeah. I'm encouraging all of our politicians to drive hard at that cliff. Just get there fast because it's going to blow up. I want it to blow up sooner rather than later, so have more time to fix it, right? Because if I'm not finished well, let's just not fuck around. Let's get there sooner.
Let's just get it over with. You're an accelerationist. Fair enough. Look, Steve, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next time we cross paths.
Cheers, Topher.
All the best.
Yeah. Well, I'll catch up next time we're in Melbourne, mate. That'd be really good, actually.
Yeah, please do. Look me up.
For at least for Avalon next year, but hopefully before as well. So.
Well, I don't know how much longer I'll be in Melbourne, but next time you come through Albury.
I'll do that. I'll bomb into Albury the way through.
All right, sounds good.
All right,
sounds good.
Okay.
That was Steve Baxter. I'm Topher Field. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, ring the bell, do all of the things. You know how it works. You know how YouTube works. Make sure you do all of the things. You can follow me on all the other socials at Topher Field. Don't forget to go to topherfield.net, sign up for my email list so I can stay in touch with you no matter what happens with deplatformings and who knows what else. And if you do want to see more of this work and you want to make it financially possible for me to spend even more time doing this sort of thing, please check out the subscribestar.com/Topher Field link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.